Look, it's been a fabulous morning session, and we're really pleased at Health Translation SA to be involved in this activity. As mentioned, I'm the ED of the Health Translation SA, and we are the node for South Australia. So we're really pleased to be part of today's session and chairing it. Okay, here we go. I'm over on this one. Thank you. Look, great to hear from Matthias and actually bring together those principles. Those principles are going to be guiding this project. Great to hear from Alison about a very practical example about how the benefits of really sharing data and how it can make a big difference. Obviously, Rhys brought to the table the information around Health Data Australia and the great role the ARDC has done with the Hasanda project. And then, Dougie, thank you for the examples you've had as well. So now we're going to move into the panel session, and I can see that there's a bunch of questions coming through, so I will do my very best to answer those questions. If they don't get answered now, we will do a Q&A after the session, and so that will be circulated to all participants. So don't stress if you don't get your question answered. We'll certainly make sure that that information is collated and put out into the Australian community. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on Kaurna land here in Adelaide, and I really pay my respect to Kaurna elders past, present and future, and that it's freezing here on Kaurna land today. So for some reason, winter has hit back. So with those introductory comments, I'd just like to again acknowledge the important role that the ARDC has played in facilitating this national project. We would not be here if it wasn't for the goodwill and also the approach that the ARDC has used in bringing people on this journey. And I think that's incredibly important because the change, the cultural change, the technical change, the everything that is needed to make this happen has been part of this cultural this pull and the engagement across Australia. So we were very happy to be facilitating it in South Australia and continue to do that in the future. So what I'd like to do now is turn to the panel and get our panelists to ask one pre-prepared question, and then we'll launch into the ones that are already available, that are coming through the system. So firstly, I'm going to introduce Julie. You haven't seen Julie yet today, so I'm going to quickly introduce Julie, and she's going to answer her first question. So Julie Simpson is from the University of Melbourne. She's Professor and Head of the Biostats Unit at the Melbourne University School of Population and Global Health and Director of the Methods and Implementation Support for Clinical and Health Research Hub. Her primary area of research is bridging the novel statistical and mathematical models approach to inform treatment policy for malaria, and she has been an advisor to the World Health Organization on a number of malaria projects. Julie is actually the project lead for MAC, which is another one of the research translation centres across Australia that is leading a node, and we're really pleased to have Julie here today. Now, the question that's been posed to Julie today is what motivates you to share your research data for secondary purposes? And why do you think this is important? And I think this is the nub of it. What's going to be the trigger that we're going to get these primary researchers really embracing this across Australia? So your insights into this question will be really welcomed by everybody. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the introduction and thanks for inviting me to be part of the panel. And I'd just like to echo that it's been fantastic to be one of the node leaders for this great project of Hasanda. Maybe to quote Matthias, give life to data beyond the research paper. And as being a statistician, I love data. I've worked with data sets for over 30 years. But I think maybe to give an example, I've worked in malaria since 1995. I actually had the privilege then to work in Thailand and Vietnam and on refugee camps as and I think it's key in some areas. In malaria, some of the drug treatments haven't changed for 50 years. It's the same dose fits all. And so over 12 years ago, the Worldwide Anti-Malaria Resistance Network was set up, which was a platform for people to share data and collaborate for us to answer novel questions. And that's led to incredible work where we've changed now treatment policy and improved lives. And so that definitely motivated me to be part of Hasanda, and I think it's a chance for us to do that in Australia. I think also when you set up these platforms and do demonstration, it can lead on to other things. So if I think of the malaria platform, that's now grown into the Infectious Disease Data Observatory. So it's not just malaria now, it's an array of whole amount of infectious diseases. But what it was advantageous was when COVID came along, this platform was already there. So there was already the SOPs, the principles of, how to share data, how it was going to work. There was proof of principle with many disease examples. And I just got off the website this morning. They've now got data from over 800,000 hospitalised individuals from 1,200 institutions from 60 countries. And they've already done 60 novel analyses of data to answer questions really timely. So we have the chance to do something like this in Australia. This is the metadata platform to be the start of this, but I think it's really exciting, and we also always should think about how can we maximise the information we get from data from all the time that these clinicians and patients have put in to answer timely questions. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. And I think that really goes to the point about being visionary and thinking about the big picture as opposed to what's right in front of you on your day-to-day basis. So it's about these primary researchers thinking, okay, how can we contribute to what we can do collectively as opposed to at an individual level? So yeah, great comments. Thank you. I'm now going to jump to Alison. Now, you've already been introduced to Alison, and obviously leading the mental health node has been critically important. Alison, I'm going to ask you your first question. How do you expect that the platform, the Health Data Australia platform, will speed up the process of data sharing? It's really about this acceleration that seems to be so important in this space. How do you think this will help that?
Thanks a lot, Wendy. And I think, as I said in my talk, the vast amount of time that we spent trying to do an individual patient data meta-analysis was an extremely frustrating process of trying to find where the studies were. And this is despite me knowing most people in the field, but trying to then request the data from these people. And we even found fellow researchers that weren't willing to share data. And also then using the studies that we had to look at, well, are there any studies that we've missed? So looking at the citations and references in existing articles to try to, again, trawl through what we might have missed in an area that I actually know quite well. And even despite that, it was a very tedious process indeed. So I think a platform like Health Data Australia, it's got 175 studies on it now. I think Rhys said, obviously, the more studies there are, the more ground it's going to cover. But even at the moment, there's two main things I think it'll help with. One is going in there and basically having a bit of a play around, exploring what data's there, because that can help you to ask novel questions. So what might have been a independent variable might become a dependent variable. In mental health research, it's very messy. So we've got people who've got anxiety, depression, some psychotic symptoms. The studies often measure all of these things at multiple time points, multiple treatments that they've had. So where somebody might have set out to measure the effect of an antidepressant on depression, because we have to measure anxiety and personality disorder variables and substance abuse variables, because they all modify the effect of a treatment on the outcome. A new person coming in and go, well, actually, what's the effect of that antidepressant on their personality disorder? And turn that around and then ask novel questions. And because the sample sizes in individual studies are so small, it's very hard to recruit people with mental health problems into clinical studies. So when I said we had over 3,000 participants, and then I think Dougie came back and said there were 80,000 participants in one of his diabetes study, I thought, 3,000 doesn't sound very much, does it? But actually, the vast majority of studies in that area have their sample sizes in the double figures. So 3,000 is a massive sample size. Anyway, so you can go in and you can have a look at trying to answer innovative questions, looking at the data that's already there. If you already have a question in mind, like we did for our individual patient data meta-analysis, it would be incredibly helpful to have all of the data sets there so that you can see them. You can see what sort of data use agreements people have got. You can see what variables they've got, how they measured depression. There's like a dozen different ways. So you can already just speed up that process incredibly by having that that menu of what's available and what, in principle, people would be willing to share. So really that I think is, as you said, Wendy, it'll just accelerate the process and enable us to answer novel questions.
Thanks, Alison. And I think they're two great examples. And thanks for stepping us through both of those, because I think it made it really clear. I was just thinking about what you were saying, and it feels like if we're trying to climb to the top of Mount Everest, we're starting from base camp as opposed to having to do, all that walking in to get up to base camp. It feels like we're already well on the way by having Health Data Australia in place. So the more people get on board to actually populate it with a trial so that it's there, the more opportunity secondary researchers and other can actually go in and really chip away at what's in there and really do that kind of analysis so they're well prepared for to get going. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to move on to Melina. We haven't actually heard from Melina yet, so I'm just going to give her a little intro. So Melina is actually the manager of the Australian New Zealand Clinical Trial Register, so ANZCTR. Many of you will be very familiar with that. And the Cochrane Breast Cancer Group at the NHMRC Clinical Trials Centre. So she wears a couple of hats. Earlier this year, she co-led the update of a comprehensive report on Australian clinical trial activity over the last 15-year period. And a synopsis of the report was published in the Medical Journal of Australia. So Melina has probably, I'm sorry, Melina, I'm not in the room with you, but I imagine you get your hands dirty with the processes and the things that are actually in place with the ANZCTR around how it actually works and how it can help. So we're really pleased to have you here, because I know there are the questions around how is this different and where does this fit in with the ANZCTR. Now, Rhys showed very clearly on his PowerPoint presentation that the linkage and pulling data from it. But my question to you is, what role do you think that registries such as ANZCTR have to play in enabling mechanisms for researchers to share their data? So it's more than just the functional aspect of the ANZCTR, although we'd be happy for you to make some comments on that, but really extending that to think about registers and how they can play a role in really amping this up even further. So over to you in the room, Melina.
Okay, thanks, Wendy. And I'd just like to echo everyone else's gosh, that's loud. Everyone else's comments around how it's been wonderful working with the ARDC team and getting the Hasanda platform up and running. In terms of the roles of registries, I can see at least three, and I might go from the micro to the macro. So the first would be around an educational role. So this is, just to increase awareness and understanding around what is data sharing. In the ANZCTR, for example, we have clinical researchers need to complete 12 steps to register their trial, and one step focuses purely on data sharing. And there's a lot to that part. People need to explain what data they might share, how they might share it, when, etc. And so what we find sometimes is that that's a lot for researchers to take in. So the ANZCTR team is there to help and guide people through what we're actually asking. So, in some cases it's explaining what we mean by data sharing, what is meant by individual participant data. That's just one aspect that the ANZCTR is currently doing, other registries are doing, and will continue to do. So I think that's first point. Second point would be around, further advocacy work. We know that having policies and best research practice guidelines in place has worked for getting trials registered before the first participant is enrolled in the study. So I think some policies around making sure that people update the trial registration record when the trial is completed, and that is actually a prompt for researchers to look at their data sharing plan and maybe reconsider where their research is up to, whether they now have the resources to now that Hasanda is here, to think about, yes, we can share data. And the third role would be, around more collaboration. I think registries, and this is a great example where we've shown that registries can exchange knowledge and data with data sharing initiatives and platforms. And I think, and I know that clinicaltrials.gov has done that to some extent with the Vivli platform. So we can only, let's imagine what would be possible if collectively trial registries worked with data sharing initiatives and platforms worldwide. So yeah, that would be very exciting.
Yeah, thanks very much. And we might come back to you on some of the reflections around ANZCTR and its nexus with the rest of the project in a bit. But before I go there, I'm going to go to Rhys. And Rhys, look, you've already introduced yourself through obviously the presentation. So thank you for your presentation today and your work towards this project. Being an Adelaide-based person as well, we have had many discussions and collaborations around how we get this baby to hum. So here we are again, really looking at how we can make it work. So my question to you is really to help the audience understand, how is HDA, the Health Data Australia platform that Hassan has created, different from ANZCTR from your perspective?
Right. So I think I talked about this before, that the critical thing of course, ANZCTR is about trials. It's the primary place where information about all clinical trials must be recorded. HDA is only concerning the data sets. And I think a couple of things that a couple of the previous speakers have said, you think the data is out there. I think Alison made a comment, and someone's done the trial, but you'd be buggered if you can find the data set. And in other areas of outside of health or medical, it's extraordinary the step you make just by making the data visible, the findable step, which sounds like a really basic thing, but actually in almost every sector, there's a massive amount of research data in particular out there, but it's all in tiny little silos. So the critical thing for HDA was to make the data sets themselves available, findable and then accessible. But the findability part's extraordinarily important, even though it seems like a basic step. And so that's the critical thing, I think, is our focus is on data sets. Now, of course, you can have one ANZCTR record and multiple data sets. So you can publish one data set, you might then publish a second wave, you might publish some kind of combined study that comes out later. And it's also worth saying that you can put data sets in an HDA that are not in a publication, like a journal publication. If you've produced an output, which could be a data set, and you're happy to make it available for sharing under the right terms and conditions, and you can mint a DOI for it, then it can go in HDA. But it does have to have the match between the data set and the ANZCTR record. So that those two things come together, then it will appear in HDA. So it's the data set focus.
You're back.
Oh, yep.
So just to continue that conversation, Rhys, I think the important nuance is that it's the metadata, that is so much work gets done on the metadata for Health Data Australia, and then that is what actually links into and we have described that at length during today, but I think that's an important thing. And I think the other thing that I always reflect on is that the data dictionaries, the the protocols for studies, those sort of things are all things that can be given an identifier and actually put onto the HDA website. So I think those are important comments. Did you want to make any? No,
that's correct. I mean, and Dougie's sort of, when you have such a complicated network of people already doing their pieces of work, to do what Vivli have done in the US. In fact, they've got a large repository and they actually tip the data itself into the repository, and they make one large repository. Now that would keep me awake at night for a year to notion of trying to do that. Instead, what we have a federated system. So the people can keep doing all the great things that they're already doing in their places, and there's fantastic stuff going on. The federated system means if you have high quality metadata, and that's the critical piece, if you have high quality metadata and good and complete metadata and an agreed way in which that can be exchanged, which is what we've established, then that can be brought together effectively as one giant accessible data set, even though all you're doing is looking at the catalogue. But it gives you visibility, it gives you the ability to do the things that our researcher colleagues have talked about today. See the potential use for collaboration, and then know that there is a path to accessing that. So the metadata, even though it's boring, Matthias would say it's not boring, but even though it seems a bit boring, it's absolutely critical.
Yeah, agree. Thank you for that. Now I'm going to go to one of what we're referring to as an audience favourite question, which has come through, and I'll be happy for people to put their hand up or wave if they'd like to answer. Could you talk about data governance talk on how data governance can ensure robust data security in context of research data sharing? So basically it's around data governance and what things need to be in place around data governance to ensure that the security is there for data sharing. Who would like to take that one?
I can start if you want.
Yeah, thank you. That'd be good.
I think there's a couple of key words in there. There's a couple of triggers in there. Security is an interesting thing. So I'll just say one thing. I went to the e-research conference last week, which is a sort of industry conference for e-research people like myself. And there was a lot of technical talk, but what was remarkable about the meeting this year is that there was way more talk about governance than anything else. And those, what I call the soft infrastructure. And everybody across every single field, including health and medical, said the governance is the critical piece. That's the bit we're having trouble with. And it is, I would argue, the most complicated in health because we've got however many state health services with God knows how many local area networks, except in Queensland where I think they've got one Department of Health, but everybody else has got multiple players. And you've got state governments, federal government, research institutions, etc. The way things are going is there's a framework called the 5 safes, which is a sort of a principle for managing sensitive data, and it talks about safe people, safe. Well, I can't remember. I should know this off the top of my head, but part of it's about infrastructure, part of it's about policies, part of it's about having your ethics and consent in place, and then the projects themselves being approved. So the short answer is it's a bit about data security, so it's not in a place that can be hacked. But most importantly, it's actually about governance, which broadly is who makes the decisions. So Hassan does not directly influence that. We can't tell people what to do. We have done some work around principles for data governance. So we've got a guideline for data sharing agreements. We've got a guideline for how you would develop a data sharing policy. And everybody who puts a data set into HDA is required to have a data sharing policy, and they know they're going to have to produce a data sharing agreement, and they're going to have a standard operating procedure in place. So all of our Hasanda nodes have done that, and that's some of them had them in place, some of them didn't. So it's not. I don't have a short solution except to say I think it's a community-driven thing. I don't think it's realistic to say that every single institution and every single hospital in the country would have the same form of data sharing agreement, for example, or a data sharing policy. To get that many lawyers in the room at the same time and get them to agree is never going to happen. But I don't think it has to. I think provided that we agree on a set of principles, let them choose the words they want to choose. But if it's a bit like, as Dougie said, they don't have to all use the same electronic medical record system, but they do need to agree on a common model of what needs to be included in the bit that exchanges. I think that's the critical bit.
Yeah, thanks, Rhys. And I think this project has prompted us all to be thinking and having those discussions and conversations and identifying the way we want to move forward in these spaces and highlighting it. And then Health Data Australia itself is actually providing the infrastructure to reduce the risks as much as possible. So I think that's really useful. Alison, did you have a follow-up comment there?
Yes, just from a practical point of view, I mean, clearly what's the governance processes are crucial. So as Rhys said, there's got to be the data use agreements, data sharing agreements. The other thing is, so a lot of studies that will contribute data have already got publication policies where they will say that the original people who generated the data would like to be part of a study. They'd like the right to be on the paper if they contribute. So there's those issues. And there's the security of the how the data is transferred to somebody else. And what we have at the mental health node is actually we partner with a trusted research environment, which is a virtual room where the individual patient data gets magically sucked into. People can analyse the data in that secure room, but you cannot extract the individual patient data from there. It's just, you know how I said it was a nice day in Melbourne? It's just started hailing.
It's Melbourne. That's what happens.
So I can hardly hear myself. But the secure data room doesn't let anybody take the data out. So it can't be reused without permission. It can't be sent to somebody else. Your computer cannot be hacked and it goes somewhere else because it's in this little room that's not connected to the internet. And what you can extract from that little room is just the summary data. So I think these are all really crucial governance issues that if people are reassured that their data is safe, but it will only be used for what it's been agreed to be used for, I think that should really increase the amount of data sharing that happens.
I think it's a great point. And I think just to reaffirm that it's the metadata that is being shared through the Health Data Australia and not the actual data. The actual data is held on by the researcher, and the researcher actually, through these mechanisms you just outlined, is the ones that are determining how that gets shared in a secure way. So I think that's critically important to be a take-home message from this panel, is that it's the metadata that's shared and not the actual data. So moving on to the next question, I'm going to sow this one for all of you, if you can just think about it. What do you expect? So what do you think would be the main challenge for Australia for making this all happen? I'm not going to finish on this one because we're not finishing on a negative, but what do you think and is the main challenge we're going to need to actually address over the next 3 to 5 years? Because we'd like to be thinking in 5 years' time, we're looking back and going, wow, all this time, investment in time, energy and money has been worthwhile. So what do you think is going to be the main challenge we need to overcome? And Julie, would you have something you'd like to start with? And then we'll go to the room in person, and then we'll go to Alison. So Julie, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, I think the main challenge, and what I've heard from sort of the clinician PIs, is, once they've finished the study and then they might get these requests, who's sort of going to cover the costs or the things of cleaning or preparing the data for that transfer into a virtual network or whichever form it'll be. So I suppose it's a little bit about how they feel. Is it going to be a lot of the time put on the PI to suddenly prepare all these data sets for somebody who's had a request to do a reuse? So it's how can we create guidance and efficiencies, but think also where we could support that will be one of the challenges I foresee.
That's a good one, and thank you for that. And I think it's actually preparing the metadata in the first step and then preparing for the actual sharing. So I think there's actually 2 steps that perhaps we're going to need to just consolidate our thinking around. So over to the room, Melina or Rhys, who would you like to start off there? Who's got the mic?
I can start. 2 comments, I think. The first is around, thinking about data sharing at the time of setting up the actual clinical trial. So when setting up the infrastructure, etc., sort of front-loading the data sharing processes, etc., at that initial stage. That's just one suggestion, and building that in, I suppose, into grant applications, and I'm not sure where NHMRC and others stand on that. And the second would be what I've understood just from the trial registration and updating process is that we need to make things easier for people. So I'm not exactly sure how that is, but when we're saying, let's join the Hasanda initiative, then we not only need to explain the why, but I think it's important to couple that with how, and that we have all the supportive documentation and processes in place so people can see that it's possible. They're just my thoughts for now.
Yeah, thanks. And it's really about making it easy, isn't it? As easy as possible. That it flows and it's not too onerous. So I think they're really good points. And I do think that prospective trial or preparing prospectively is really important, and the work we need to do with ethics committees just to and researchers to get that in, to front load it, let's say, and so we're not always doing everything retrospectively. Yep. Over to you, Rhys.
Yeah, I agree with all of the previous comments. The other thing that I could have said each of those. The other thing, I think ethics is a challenge of all the governance things. It's not something that one organisation can solve, but I think there's inconsistency in the way in which ethics committees individually respond to things. There's a question in one of the other people talking about old trials, for example, and I want to bring in some old trials that had dodgy consent, but you know what I mean. Didn't have a modern version of consent. What do you do with those? So I think that's going to be a critical piece. You know, most researchers I speak to say, for goodness sake, can you just sort out the ethics committee for me, or the 5 different ethics committees that I have to go to and the 5 different site-specific applications I have to fill out. And I think that's going to be a challenge, and that, again, I think is going to require a collaborative effort. We will contribute to that. We've got a project that's about to start to look at developing some of those guidelines. So we did it with consent, so I'm just going to put in a plug because there was a response in there about consent. There is now a couple of standardised wordings for consent forms. I think the best one is the one that Informed CTIQ produced, which they did in partnership with us, which is now a 4-page consent form, patient information consent form that includes wording that is recommended to use if you're planning to share the data. So as Melina said, thinking up front, making sure that when you create your consent form, you create your data management plan, that you have in mind straight away that you're going to be sharing this data down the track as a default position.
Thanks, and I think that's been really useful, but probably part of the project the whole way through these 3 years has been preempting the future and trying to get ahead of the curve, so we actually produce the resources we know we're going to need to overcome some of these challenges.
Yep.
And certainly that thinking has been important in all the steering committees and working groups and things, that is going, okay, how do we set this up for success as much as possible? But yeah, really important. Alison, did you want to add anything to the challenge discussion? And then I've got one quick question for you after that.
I think the other thing is the cultural change that's necessary. So a cultural change amongst researchers so that they see data sharing as a good thing, and eventually it'd be good for them to move towards seeing it as just an extension of their primary study. And we also need a cultural shift, I think, in the general public and potential participants, again, for them to see that it's really their right to have their data maximally used. As Matthias said, that they've been put through a lot of pain and discomfort and inconvenience to contribute data to an original study. It would be good for them to then say, well, I would like my study to contribute to answer different questions for the good of humanity. So we really need, I think, to bring the general public and consumer groups with us, as well as bringing researchers with us to say, let's change the culture so that we make the best use of the data as we possibly can. Did you want to add something, Rhys? Did I see?
No, I couldn't agree more. I think just to say that there's been a bit of work done by a few groups. ACTA have done some work, CTIQ have done some work on patient attitudes to data sharing, and generally patients are happy for their data to be shared. Mostly, it's in the 80s to 90%. It's also similar overseas. But it does matter. They need to know the conditions under which that. Not only do they need to know that for the privacy legislation, but actually they want to know. And particularly the sticky one is: are you going to share this with a pharmaceutical company? And and the answer is usually no. Are you happy for a university researcher to use it? Usually, they're usually happy for it to use for even unspecified, even though we can't use that terminology, other types of research, provided it's done by universities. They're much more hesitant to make it available to a pharmaceutical company, and that's actually probably a little bit of a barrier too. Down the track is we have got to engage with the pharmaceutical companies in this data sharing world. There's a bit more of that going on overseas than here. We can do that. We've got pharma involved in our consultations, but that's not the main driver. The main driver is investigator initiated. But we will have some work to do around the education of participants, and there's a bit of work to do there, I think. But
thank you. Alison, I've just got one specific question for you, but it does actually heighten a point that probably some of the audience members are interested in. When you're looking at individual participant level data, so it's really about whether patients need to, do you go back to patients to, sorry, I'll read the question exactly. Did permission at the individual patient level need contact with the patients for any data sets? So I think the question is trying to get into it's probably that prospective permission, that retrospective permission for reusing data. Do you have to get individuals to reuse that, give permission?
I think in an ideal world, that as Melina was saying, the original researchers will have got consent for their data to be used by other researchers for future questions. And I think, as Rhys said, people are usually quite happy to sign that. The caveat of the pharmaceutical companies just add to that. Some people don't want their data shared with insurance companies. True. But if it's shared with other researchers, so in an ideal world, you will have a trial included that's already got that unspecified consent or extended consent. The other way to try and get large data sets, which were done back in the day, where there was the consent forms were not didn't include that as an option, is to make an argument that the research is in the public interest, and that it's not in the public interest to spend time, vast amounts of time and money trying to contact people who have probably died because the research was done so long ago. So there's, I think, two ways of doing that. And as Rhys said, ethics committees vary, but some ethics committees are willing to do a waiver of consent if it's impractical to go back and ask all the original participants for their consent.
Yes.
Argue that it's in the public interest.
Thank you. And I think there is, as Rhys has already mentioned, some work that will be going on across Australia with ethics committees. There's a big ethics committee conference coming up in early December, and I know the topic of this data sharing and how we work through those challenges are actually going to be discussed at that conference. So I think that's really important, that we engage with the community collectively across Australia, as well as the individual ones, because as you've said, some are more supportive than others, and so we need to actually get people across the board, because for researchers that's it's nice to have that consistency and not have a fragmented approach. And I think that's one of the other things that Health Data Australia is able to do, is bring that more organised approach across the country, as opposed to a bit here and a bit there. So that's really one of the benefits. So I'm now going to turn your minds to probably what will be the last question, and I'm going to put it to all of you. What are some of the key benefits for consumers in this? Okay, as opposed to it being all about the researchers. Obviously, some of you it's very clear, but what are the key benefits to consumers of a research system that prioritises data sharing? So if you can really flip your mind to the profile and the positioning of consumers. Who would like to kick off on that one?
I might kick off on that, and it was just an extension of what I said before. And acknowledging it, as Rhys said, most people who participate in studies are quite happy for their data to be shared, provided they know what the research is about and that they trust that it's a university doing the research. But I think the benefits for participants are that they've already gone through this inconvenience and time and often pain and discomfort, and to be able to talk to them about the extended consent, that their research, that their data will be used to answer other important questions and ultimately improve the lives of people who are suffering from similar illnesses to their own. And most people are actually quite altruistic when you talk to them about that, about how they can make things better for others.
Great, thank you. Anyone else like to comment from that? Julie, go for it.
I think also for the patient, it can be using data that's already available to answer questions about where is the next direction to go in terms of the research, what should the focus should be. So when we're going to design the next big trial or study that's going to address, maybe it can help refine and make sure that we're targeting the right people in that population and maximising that benefit here.
Thank you. From in-person room, from the conference, anyone? Rhys or Melina got a comment?
I'll just echo Alison's comment. I think if people know that they're participating in the trial and that data will go forward to advance science and medicine in the future. I think that's a very strong argument. Yeah.
But I agree with all that. There's a component of education we've talked about. I was pleased to hear some discussion there about training education. Obviously, that's something we're starting to do a bit of work on together in the Hasanda project, but there absolutely is a requirement that we make sure we keep consumers informed about these benefits. Some of them get it straight away. Others, once you explain it to them, they go, of course. As Alison said there, the fact that they're even considering participating in research, they mean that there's an altruistic component. I mean, we all know that actually, I think the evidence, clinicians can correct me, but people who are participating in clinical trials do better in the outcome of their illness, whatever the illness is. And that's why we know that you can sell that to a patient because it's true. Those are the facts. And if anyone wants to look, I mentioned Vivly before. On the Vivly website, there's a really lovely, and all the American accent, but a really lovely video aimed at participants that said exactly these sort of things. You've gone to the trouble of giving your time and your data. We're going to make sure we make the best use of it. That there's an education component that I think we can contribute to.
Yeah, and I think that's that cultural piece that we talked about before, and bringing everybody on this journey with us, not just the research community, but the whole community. So, I encourage that focus on those resources and how we engage really well with consumers. I know that it's been part of the process to date. We've had consumers on the journey with us, but really pushing that forward is great. So, which one? Oh, here we go. Another question. Thank you. So if someone wants to start sharing their data but has no idea where to begin, what should they do?
Should I answer that? I suppose I should. Why am I doing all the talking?
No, you're not. Everyone else is sharing. It's okay.
So I think what I mentioned very briefly at the end of my demo was they can either, if they are aware of one of the Hasanda nodes, so for example, if you're at the University of Melbourne, you know about the MAC node, you could contact the MAC node directly. It may be, obviously, if you know of someone who's working in one of the Hasanda nodes, that's probably the first port of call. If you're not aware of whether or not your institution or your research group is associated with a Hasanda node, you can contact ARDC at Hasanda@ARDC, and we would make that connection. And the reason you can't not just anybody can put their data in is, I think we've seen today the importance of getting that quality metadata is critical, and that's really facilitated by the Hasanda nodes at the moment. We may have more nodes, we may have a broader process, but at the moment that's the way it's happening, so that's the critical piece. But if there's any doubt whatsoever, Hasanda@ARDC, email to one of us.
Great, and then it'll get to us nodes. So thank you. So look, I'm going to start to wrap up the panel discussion now. What I'm going to do is go to each of you to just give me, from your heart and soul, why a little bit of a roundup comment on what you think the value of this whole initiative is, and why are you 2 feet in going for it. So, Julie, I'll start with you. You've already made some comments, but just as a final statement about where you're positioned would be great.
I think, that the reuse of the data is a gain for the clinical and health workforce and also for the patient. And what's been set up here is, at this stage, you just have to connect up your metadata by connecting with one of our nodes. So for me, it's just a win-win at this.
Fantastic. Thank you. Alison, what's your sum up comment about why you're here and what people should take home with them?
I think they should take home that really Australia's been lagging behind in terms of secondary use of data and data sharing. And this initiative by ARDC, the whole Hasanda initiative, is potentially a game changer for us. So I think it benefits researchers in that we can, the secondary users can use the Hasanda platform to really ask novel questions and write very high impact papers that will influence practice and policy. I think for the data custodians, it's a chance to collaborate with other people to, data custodians can be secondary users as well, but to make sure that the research that you put your heart and soul into has maximum impact. And for participants and potential participants, that we should see this as a fantastic initiative of the government and ARDC to try to improve the quality of research in Australia.
Great, thank you. They were great comments. Melina, would you like to have a little sum up, take home message for the audience?
Yes, I suppose what this has shown is that there is, through this collaboration, we have a national data sharing platform where people can request data across Australia, and this is an excellent model then that could be used internationally, and it's incredible to think about what type of questions could be asked and answered if this was happening internationally and we're all connected using data after the trial has ended. Sorry, that wasn't very eloquent, but got there.
Well, it was good.
Thanks. Great. We got the message, no problems.
It was good.
Rhys, would you like a take home?
Yeah, sure. And in fact, I'll just say HDR, we are talking to HDR UK, which is a somewhat similar organisation to us, except that I found out this week that their budget is £150 million.
Don't.
Unbelievable. Anyway, that's what happens when you've got the Wellcome Trust in your back pocket. I think for me, I'm really privileged to have been involved in Hasanda and HDA, but for me, this really is it's a kind of a stepping stone for us. So we're very aware that this is it's significant, it's important, but it's really the first step, and there's a lot more work to do, and that's not so much daunting as exciting from my perspective. And so my critical sort of comment would be we really need to continue to build the community of people who are doing this together. We need that community of practitioners from all sorts of disciplines and the support of yourselves, people in this meeting, but also all the colleagues around Australia. We really do need that to build a national scale platform that works, and we're not going to shy away from hearing what the challenges are, and we would happy to be part of the solution to those over a period of time. So we're in it for the longer term, and I'm quite excited by the next few years really to keep chipping away at it. So thank you for everyone's
Thank you. Fantastic. Look, with those comments, I just want to thank the panel, and we'll put our hands together and say thank you, Julie, Alison, Melina and Rhys, for your amazing contribution. I think that's really clarified many of the questions that people may have. But as I said, if there are other questions, please shoot them through to us or shoot them through to ARDC afterwards, and we'll make sure that they get collated into a format that you have the answers. But it's an ongoing process, so it is iterative, so those answers are being solved as they come up or being addressed as they come up. So I wanted to go back over the program and just say thank you to Matthias for his opening comments and his presentation from WA, and really noting that his topic was around beyond open data, embracing the fair data sharing principles, and he did a great job giving us that information. Alison gave us that fabulous case study on mental health and why you do it, and the great value of actually using these extended data sets. Dougie gave us some other insights about unlocking data for secondary use and the potential impacts and future research and the vision that their group have got for really how you do this and do this well. And of course, Rhys gave us the detail of what's actually happened in the project. And as I said, the panel has really looked at answering the questions that matter. So thank you for your work. I'd like to now just acknowledge the people behind the scenes who've actually pulled this whole event together. It's actually quite complicated having things in many different modes or these hybrid events, but it's even complicated for me trying to chair these things. So I do think I really acknowledge the people who put a lot of thought into pulling today off, and I think it's been a fabulous activity and one that will now be available as a recorded project. The session will be available, and as I said, the frequently asked questions will also. So Hasanda is in a position where it's now starting to think about what's next. They're doing some work on what are the next stages. Obviously, we've talked about clinical trials today, but the vision is big, and the vision is really to be that driver to change the culture around data sharing across Australia, not just in clinical trials, but in other things, whether it's cohort studies, registries, other things that I know the team at Hasanda are thinking about. What are the next cabs off the rank that can be really invested in. But we've still got a lot of work to do in clinical trials at really mobilising the researchers and the research community and the community at large to really be part of this culture change. So with those comments, I'd just like to say thank you for everybody who's contributed today. Thank you to ARDC and the Hassanda team for keeping us on track for 3 years. And I think this is something that you're going to hear a lot more about. And let's hope as we continue to garner this support, Australia does catch up with the rest of the world and in fact embraces and links and does things with the rest of the world which are going to significantly be impactful and make a difference to the health and well-being of the world. It sounds big, doesn't it? Anyway, thanks for all your efforts and thanks for a great session. So I'll wrap it up there.
Thanks,
Farewell.
Wendy.